Tank junglers are on the rise for 12.23. Zeri is finally back in a playable state, while the Kassadin mini rework is looking extremely powerful. We've got all this and so much more to break down, as we are set to bring you guys a complete update on the solo queue tier list, thanks to the help of our challenger players and analyzing the most recent data. And if you didn't know, the preseason is arguably the best time to get way better at League of Legends. The reason is because when you focus on improving your own skills instead of just doing whatever it takes to scrape a win, you do tend to lose a little more in the short term in exchange for huge gains in the long term. So if you're thinking of mastering your macro skills and not joining every team fight, but instead trying to learn how to become a split-pushing god, or if you're looking to learn a new role or bootcamp your mechanics, then enroll to our world-class courses, as we teach every fundamental you could ever need with the world's largest premium library for League of Legends. And better yet, if you join SkillCapped for the long haul, then for just $6.99 a month, you can get a 1-year membership to SkillCapped. And if you don't climb at least 5 divisions while actively using SkillCapped, you can claim a full refund, so there's no risk. This subscription also grants you access to WoW Dragonflight, Valorant, and Wrath of the Lich King. So check us out right after this, link in the description below. And with that said, let's move on to today's guide. Riot slipped some last-minute K'Sante buffs into 12.23 that we were not aware of for our pre-patch tier list, so let's have a look. Base stats were buffed, with K'Sante's health growth and base health regen increased. E change was the big one though, as K'Sante's E will now partially reset auto attacks in his base form and fully reset his auto attacks while in his all-out form. A second change to E was added, being a quality of life adjustment, where if K'Sante is very close to dashing through a wall, he will now go through. You also have to take into account that Sunfire Aegis was buffed this patch, so K'Sante has become stronger in many different ways. Being able to abuse the 2-item core of Jak'Sho into Sunfire, K'Sante is sitting in a really good spot for 12.23. K'Sante will be making his first ever appearance in the OP tier as a result of these recent buffs. Another tank top laner making a move into OP tier for our mid-patch update is Dr. Mundo. Mundo had every single one of his abilities adjusted for 12.23. One of the bigger buffs consisted of Mundo's E damage being changed from a flat base scaling to now scaling off of his maximum health. This is incredible considering Mundo is such a great Heartsteel user. Ultimate is now healing more, and especially at rank 3, which makes Mundo a late game god. When it comes down to a low elo top lane carry, there are few who beat Mundo as a result of his buffs. From Iron to Plat, Mundo is insane, but he does fall off a little once you get into Diamond and above, as games don't tend to last as long. Since we try to cater our tier list to what's best for Diamond and below, we will be giving Mundo OP tier status for 12.23. So for the complete top lane tier list, we have K'Sante, Fiora, Mundo, and Shen as the 4 OP carries. We are adjusting Fiora back into OP tier for mid-patch, as the Ravenous Hydra nerfs have been super light, and with more tanks being played in the top lane and jungle, it's honestly a buff to Fiora. As expected, most of the top lane tank buffs were placebo more than anything, as Tahm Kench, Cho'Gath, Malphite, and Sion have not become significantly stronger due to their buffs. Mundo was the one exception, of course, as his buffs were extremely impactful. Best low elo top lane champs of the patch are Mundo, Mordekaiser, and Nasus. 3 of the highest priority bans are Fiora, K'Sante, and Darius. Tank junglers were having a more difficult time keeping up with clearing the jungle, so Riot made it so that your companion's attacks scale off of health and armor, and it's been a huge win. Rammus has been one jungler loving the buffs, and has skyrocketed in power for 12.23. Since jungle treat gold was reduced as well, these lower econ CC tank junglers have all become increasingly stronger. If you haven't played any Rammus in preseason, the new build consists of a Thornmail rush into Jak'Sho second. Since Chemtank and Sunfire are no longer mythic items, it's made Thornmail the most optimal rush option. As an especially good jungler for the lower ranks, Rammus will be making the move into OP tier for mid-patch. Another tank jungler shifting up the tier list for mid-patch is Zac. Zac was directly buffed, benefits from the jungle companion changes along with the Sunfire buffs, so there have been many factors leading to Zac's rise. Champs that can abuse the item combo of Jak'Sho and Demonic Embrace are really strong right now, and Zac is one of them. Before all these changes, Zac was one of the worst solo queue junglers, but that has all changed for 12.23, as we will now be moving Zac into the jungle S tier. A new jungler who shot up out of nowhere over the past 2 patches has been Sylas. With the new jungle being easier to clear, it's allowed for Sylas to make his way back into a viable spot. The build is really interesting right now, as it consists of a Night Harvester rush into Shadowflame second and Zhonya's third. Runes are different from mid lane Sylas as well, running Dark Harvest instead of Conqueror. Sylas will be placed in our jungle A tier. Moving on to the jungle tier list, the OP tier will consist of Rammus, Udyr, Master Yi, Evelynn, and Echo. With Treat Gold reduced this patch, we are noticing a trend where junglers who rely heavily on item spikes have seen a decrease in power. Kha'Zix, Rengar, Talon, and Graves are a few notables who have all seen a dip in win rate for 12.23. If you're playing one of these AD junglers and the enemy locks a tank who can build Jak'Sho, you better end up winning early game hard, or that Jak'Sho tank will heavily outscale you 2 items onward. Speaking of tanks, a few more moving up for mid-patch are Amumu and Mundo. The Amumu buffs have been insanely impactful, and his stat lines would be even more crazy if players were maxing his abilities correctly. Since W and E were buffed at the later ranks, you want to be leaving Q to max out last. Mordekaiser nerfs have landed him where we expected, as he's still a really good S tier jungler. Best low elo junglers to climb the fastest are Rammus, Mundo, and Mordekaiser. Master Yi, Udyr, and Rammus are the top 3 jungle bans of the patch. Possibly the biggest winner of the entire patch has been Kassadin thanks to the mini rework of his E. Cass E is no longer gated by ability usage and now has a flat cooldown which amplifies his one-shot power tremendously. Before this buff, if you were to clear a wave and then sit in the fog of war to wait for the enemy, your E would not be available to use. Now that E has a flat cooldown, you can just wait that out and always have E to provide more upfront burst. Your side lane power has become even greater with Kassadin, which is where he can thrive when ahead. Cast-based shield going up on Q in exchange for a lower AP ratio is massive as well. Early game is the only point where Cast can be heavily exploited, so more durability to sustain his weakest point is paying huge dividends. In our pre-patch tier list, we were unsure how impactful the E change would end up, as it's quite an unusual one, but after seeing him on live servers and diving into the analytics, Kassadin makes his way into our mid lane OP tier. One mid laner rising in popularity over the recent patches, and for good reason, has been Irelia. Irelia is one champ who can abuse all of the most broken items in the game right now, being Blade of the Ruined King, Ravenous Hydra, and Jaksho. This core is super nuts, and it's propelled Irelia into an extremely powerful spot. Irelia also does insanely well into Syndra, Victor, and Kassadin, who are all picked a ton in the current meta. Deservedly so, Irelia will be moving from A and into S tier for 12.23. For the mid lane tier list, we have just 2 champions in the OP tier, being Zed and Kassadin. Cass and Zed are simply on a level above everyone else right now, so it pushes Vex down into S tier. Vex also struggles quite a bit into both Cass and Zed, so it makes sense that she is not in the same tier as them. Syndra nerfs have actually played out a little more harsh than anticipated, as the changes have shaved about 4% off her win rate. We had originally adjusted Syndra into S for our pre-patch tier list, but we'll be shifting her down even further and into A for mid-patch. Trend is a really insane Ravenous Hydra abuser and can stomp all over a lot of the squishy mid lane champs when he gets ahead. At level 6 with ultimate available, it's way easier to perma-dive mid champs than it is most top lane champs. With E and Ravenous, you can shove waves super fast and roam around with Ghosts to heavily impact the map. Cass coming back into meta is another great reason to have Trend available as a pocket pick, and he'll be placed in S tier for mid-patch. The most optimal low elo mid lane champs are Swain, Malzahar, and Heimerdinger. Zed, Kassadin, and Irelia are now 3 of the highest priority mid lane bans. Zeri is back to being a relatively strong carry for 12.23 as the buffs have lifted her from the grave. Zeri is a slightly more vulnerable champion now with her Q range being lowered, but the reward for being up close has been increased with damage going up. This shift in power has been super positive and has led to about a 7% win rate spike. Now, if the average champion were to see a win rate jump of 7%, it would probably land them in an OP spot. But since Zeri was so terrible before the buffs, she's now in a good spot, but nothing over the top. Is it worthwhile to pick Zeri back up again? Our analysts definitely think so, and she will be placed in our A tier for mid-patch. Zeri was the only ADC change for 12.23, so the tier list is looking very similar to last patch. The OP tier consists of Twitch, Tristana, and Kai'Sa. For an update on Ravenous Hydra ADCs, the nerfs have made it suboptimal on most of them now. Draven and Samira are better off skipping the item, however the one exception is Neela. Neela is still performing super well with Hydra as a rush, as the 2-item core of Ravenous and Shield Bow synergize extremely well with her kit. Now that Zeri is no longer in a terrible spot, the only ADCs you really want to stay away from are Aphelios and Kalista. They can work for the higher elos, but for the majority of ranks, there are much more optimal picks. Best low elo ADCs are Tristana, Misfortune, and Ziggs. Top 3 bans of the patch include Draven, Kai'Sa, and Samira. The one champ we incorrectly predicted their direction in power shift for 12.23 was Amumu's support. Q and E being nerfed to the earlier ranks had us hypothesizing that it would hurt Amumu's laning phase too much, but the buff to his W and buff to E damage at max rank outweighed the early game woes. Riot even mentioned in the patch notes themselves that they were not trying to buff Amumu's support with these changes, but he's seen about a 3% increase in win rate from this patch. As a result of the positive outlook from the buffs, Amumu will be moving back into the support OP tier for mid-patch. Maokai was one of the other supports buffed for 12.23, and he's landed in a very powerful spot. Q buffs amplifying Maokai's all-in power are a really big deal and has allowed him to solidify an OP tier spot once again. Moving on to the support tier list, the OP tier will consist of a handful of champions being Amumu, Heimerdinger, Blitzcrank, Maokai, and Janna. We've been on the fence about moving Heimer into OP tier for the past few patches now, and have finally decided to bump him up. Heimer plays extremely well into hook supports like Thresh, Blitzcrank, and Nautilus due to his turrets, and even in a lot of double-ranged matchups, he's able able to go toe-to-toe. The ability to perma-shove waves and apply a ton of pressure is what makes Heimer so potent for solo queue. Very few supports have the ability to apply as much constant pressure as Heimer. The Yuumi nerfs have been about as impactful as anticipated, as she is definitely one of the weaker solo queue enchanters now, hovering down in our B tier. A few of the best low elo supports you should consider are Brand, Heimerdinger, and Zyra. Janna, Blitzcrank, and Heimerdinger are some of the most optimal support bans. Alright guys, before we wrap this up, let's tell you a little more about SkillCapped. So, we offer a 5-division rank up guarantee, and think that's a pretty crazy thing to offer. It's like a gym membership guaranteeing you'll get ripped. Your local gym would go bust if they offered that, right? Not us. We've offered this for years because our service really does work. It works so well, in fact, that we're able to produce by far the largest catalog of premium league guides on the internet. We add over 20 videos a week, with over 1,600 guides curated into over 100 courses no one can compare. We've also sent challenger players into Elo Hell 714 times and counting, where they commentate how to carry live. They also respond to all questions asked. Sign up today for as little as $6.99 a month if you are serious about improving. So that's going to round everything out for our 12.23 mid-patch tier list update. Thank you guys so much for watching. Good luck in solo queue, and we'll see you in the next one.